Interesting times. Today's stories. Chelsea Manning says mass surveillance is getting worse. Analyst discusses Venezuela's outlawed government. Group of G20 countries refuse to recognize the Venezuela vote. Macron hails frank talks with Putin in Russia. Pakistan swelters under heat wave. Iran's first female manufacturer, a victim of Trump. Plus, EBC's Kat Joy takes us to the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. This is Eagle News Canada, bringing you stories from around the globe. I am Lou Aquino. Whistleblower Chelsea Manning told a Montreal audience mass surveillance by government agencies is increasing, especially in the United States, as she called for limits on the development of artificial intelligence. Mass surveillance by government agencies is increasing, especially in the United States, whistleblower Chelsea Manning told a Montreal audience as she called for limits on the development of artificial intelligence. Manning said she is stunned now by the dramatic change in policing style and aggressive government surveillance.
Because when I got out of prison, I thought, I'm going to retire, I'm going to hide for a while, I'm just going to sit and, kind of enjoy life a bit. But it was really remarkable to me to see such a dramatic change in policing style, aggressive surveillance.
She urged programmers and computer scientists working on artificial intelligence and machine learning to consider the ethical implications of the technology that they are building and developing.
Realize and understand how people that are working on machine learning right now and all these algorithms, how they're focused on deadlines and on getting a product out. But they really do have to consider the ethical implications of the technology that they're building and developing.
Manning, now 30, was an Army intelligence analyst sentenced to 35 years in prison in 2013 for leaking more than 700,000 classified documents related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The revelations by Manning, who is transgender, was then known as Bradley Manning, exposed covered-up misdeeds and possible crimes by U.S. troops and allies.
Everything that we do every day has a political impact. And not doing something can also have a political impact in a small way.
Her actions made Manning a hero to anti-war and anti-secrecy activists, but U.S. establishment figures branded her a traitor. Then President Barack Obama commuted her sentence, leading to her release in May 2017. Venezuela ordered the expulsion of the top 2 U.S. diplomats in the country, charging it was the victim of a political and financial lynching after Washington tightened sanctions over Nicolas Maduro's re-election. Maduro announced the expulsion in a televised speech after being officially proclaimed the winner of the election in the South American nation mired in an acute economic crisis and facing growing international isolation.
Se está configurando una imagen total y absoluta de un gobierno forajido que está desmontando la institucionalidad de un Estado para...
The vote was boycotted by the main opposition parties and widely condemned by the international community, including the United States, which denounced it as a, quote, sham. The Venezuelan president declared U.S. Chargé d'Affaires Todd Robinson and Deputy Head of Mission Brian Naranjo persona non grata.
Es una protesta muy contundente y en donde pueden haber disminución de las relaciones comerciales, disminución de los vínculos políticos, disminución de los vínculos en cuanto a alianzas o coaliciones que se puedan llevar a cabo con un determinado país. No así.
The United States immediately threatened to retaliate. A State Department official said Washington had not received notification from the Venezuelan government through diplomatic channels, but that if the expulsion are confirmed, the United States may take appropriate reciprocal action.
En tanto y cuanto el problema venezolano no se convierta en un tema de agenda que pueda perjudicar a Rusia o a China, hasta allí Venezuela tendrá el apoyo.
In anticipation that Venezuela's chargé d'affaires in Washington, Carlos Ron, would be expelled, he was appointed Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for North America. On Monday, President Donald Trump tightened sanctions against Caracas, making it harder for the Maduro regime to sell off state assets.
Buenísimo que estemos diciendo, bajo el nivel de protección que dio el presidente Trump con la orden ejecutiva que firmó, se redujo el nivel de riesgo, por lo menos en lo que a inversionistas norteamericanos respecta. No así de inversionistas internacionales, además.
He promised to present evidence that both diplomats were engaged in a political, military, and economic conspiracy. Robinson denied the allegations. Washington and Caracas have not exchanged ambassadors since 2010, and relations between the two countries have been tense since the late leftist President Hugo Chavez, Maduro's mentor, presumed power in 1999. The deeply unpopular Maduro was declared the winner with 68% of the vote, but with a record abstention rate. The Foro Penal Group said days before the elections, 11 soldiers were arrested for planning destabilizing actions against Maduro, and they were ordered to prison on Tuesday. Venezuelans are reeling under a deepening crisis, with hyperinflation projected by the IMF to reach 13,800% this year, and dire shortages of food and medicine. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled the country to escape the growing deprivation. The Foreign Ministry earlier lashed out at the U.S. sanctions, accusing Washington of intensifying a criminal, financial, and economic blockade, which it called a crime against humanity for impeding access to essential goods. It said U.S. policy promotes hatred, intolerance, and political and financial lynching of Venezuela. Washington has previously slapped sanctions on the president and his senior aides and banned U.S. entities from buying any more debt from Caracas or State Oil Company, PDVSA. The European Union said it was also weighing new sanctions after the election was marred by irregularities and failed to meet international standards. Caracas is facing increasing international isolation, with the United States, the European Union, and the 14 countries of the Lima Group, which includes Argentina, Brazil, and Canada, refusing to recognize the election result. Maduro, a former bus driver, union leader, and foreign minister, has insisted Venezuela is the victim of an economic war waged by the conservative opposition and external powers, including the United States, aimed at toppling him. Most economists attribute the oil-rich country's economic collapse to years of mismanagement, corruption, and a period of sharply lower oil prices. Venezuela faced growing international isolation and deepening economic crisis following President Nicolas Maduro's contested re-election, as the United States threatened punitive measures against his regime over the sham vote.
Teniendo en cuenta la falta de legitimidad del proceso electoral venezolano, desconocen los resultados de las elecciones de ayer al haber sido convocados por una autoridad ilegítima, la Asamblea Nacional Constituyente.
The stern reaction from Washington further ratcheted up the pressure on the leftist Maduro after the Lima Group's 14 members, including regional powers Argentina, Brazil, and Canada, moved to recall their ambassadors in protest at the opposition boycotted vote. Addressing cheering supporters outside Miraflores Palace in Caracas, Maduro celebrated his election to another 6-year term as a historic record, after officials credited him with 68% of votes, cast far ahead of the 21% for his nearest rival ex-army officer, Henry Falcon. But with Venezuela's long-suffering population enduring an economic crisis marked by food and medicine shortages, violent unrest, and a mass of exodus by hundreds of thousands, the vote was marred by historic 52% abstention and boycotted by the Democratic Unity Roundtable (MUD) opposition coalition as a farce. Washington echoed that assignment, with Vice President Mike Pence denouncing the vote as a sham and illegitimate, and brandished the threat of new sanctions. Falcon, a loyalist of the late leftist firebrand leader Hugo Chavez, who was neck and neck with Maduro in pre-election polls, says the vote lacked legitimacy and accused the government of vote buying. Maduro may have won, but the near future appears bleak as the country faces economic ruin. The IMF estimates that Venezuela's GDP will continue to shrink this year, with the inflation rate expected to reach 13,800%. Venezuela has always relied on its oil, but production has dropped to its lowest level in 30 years despite a recent rise in prices. Maduro, a former bus driver union leader, foreign minister, and Chavez's handpicked political heir, has presided over an implosion of once wealthy oil producers' economy since taking office in 2013. The socialist leader insists Venezuela is the victim of an economic war waged by the conservative opposition and external powers, including the United States, aimed at toppling him. In his victory speech, he vowed to dedicate myself entirely towards economic recovery. But Washington was poised to up the economic and diplomatic pressure on Maduro's regime, having previously slapped sanctions on the president and his senior aides and banned U.S. entities from buying any more debt from Caracas or state oil company PDVSA. Pence warned the United States will not sit idly by as Venezuela crumbles and the misery of their brave people continues. And Pompeo slammed the vote as choreographed by a regime too unpopular and afraid of its own people to risk free elections and open competition. The U.S. market is crucial as 1/3 of Venezuelan oil exports go to the United States, but Washington has threatened to stop buying Venezuelan oil. Venezuela's crippled oil industry lacks investment and its assets are increasingly prey to debt settlement as the country defaults. Maduro's win paves the way for an escalation of U.S. sanctions, possibly on the oil sector, and a messy sovereign debt default and restructuring, said London-based capital economists. Maduro is placing his trust in allies China and Russia. The Kremlin said Russia President Vladimir Putin congratulated Maduro on his win, but hoped for national dialogue in the interest of the entire Venezuelan people. In Beijing, the foreign ministry said the party should respect the choices made by the people of Venezuela. At his victory rally, Maduro called for a national dialogue, even though the opposition said it would step up pressure for legitimate elections later in the year. But the opposition is deeply divided, with Falcon stirring up a hornet's nest when he left the coalition to run for president. As for Maduro, his biggest risk is an implosion if government officials are cornered and pressed by the international sanctions. Up next, Macron hails frank talks with Putin in Russia. Pakistan swelters under heat wave. Iran's first female manufacturer, a victim of Trump. Eagle News Canada will return in a moment. Welcome back. You are watching Eagle News Canada. French President Emmanuel Macron hailed direct and frank talks with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, after the pair discussed Syria, Ukraine, and the Iran nuclear deal outside St. Petersburg. Thomas I. Likeness with the details.
Venons en effet, il vient d'en rendre compte, d'avoir un échange en tête-à-tête, puis un échange élargi qui a été, comme c'est toujours le cas entre nous, extrêmement direct et franc. Je suis très lucide sur les incompréhensions qui ont pu exister et s'installer entre nous. Une part de ces incompréhensions, je dois dire même l'essentiel, ne nous est pas imputable. Tant de la Russie qu'elle respecte elle aussi nos intérêts, notre souveraineté, celle de nos partenaires européens avec lesquels notre solidarité sera toujours sans faille. Et de cela aussi nous avons parlé. Je pense que nous pouvons collectivement cheminer. L'équipe de France passe les quarts de finale, je viendrai la soutenir. Et donc, comme je suis d'un naturel optimiste et confiant, et que j'irai dans quelques semaines rendre visite à Didier Deschamps et l'équipe qu'il a sélectionnée, je pourrai leur faire part de cet engagement.
In a press conference following the leaders' wide-ranging first meeting in Russia, Putin said he also regretted U.S. President Donald Trump calling off his plans for a summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un.
Франция наш традиционный партнер взаимовыгодными отношениями, с которым мы дорожим. Стараемся их активно развивать. Поддерживаем с господином президентом интенсивный политический диалог и достаточно часто обмениваемся мнениями и соображениями по телефону.
Trump announced he would not go ahead with the meeting with Kim set for June 12th in Singapore and would instead pursue Washington's campaign of maximum pressure through sanctions on Pyongyang. Meanwhile, Macron said he wanted the non-proliferation process to continue and hoped Trump's decision was just a blip. Trump's earlier withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement had provided another rare point of convergence for Moscow and Western capitals, with both Macron and Putin reaffirming their commitment to the deal. The ongoing crises in eastern Ukraine and Syria, where Russia and France have intervened on opposing sides of the conflict, were less comfortable topics for the two leaders. Nevertheless, the French president said he respected the strengthened role Russia has taken on in the region and in the world, in particular the Middle East. Before the press conference, ministers from France and Russia celebrated a raft of commercial deals between the two countries. The most significant of these was a deal that will see the French energy group Total increase its role in liquefied natural gas projects in the Arctic with Russian firm Novatek to the tune of $2.5 billion. The trip is Macron's first to Russia as president and follows a visit by German Chancellor Angela Merkel last week. Europe and Moscow are making diplomatic overtures to save the Iran deal, now under threat after the recent U.S. withdrawal. Putin handed Macron's wife Brigitte flowers as he greeted the couple late in the afternoon at the Constantine Palace, a former residence of Peter the Great, set some 20 kilometers outside St. Petersburg. The meeting comes almost exactly a year since the freshly elected Macron hosted Putin in Versailles, when the French leader accused the Russian media of producing lying propaganda during a joint press conference. The visit will also see Macron address the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. The talks take place after U.S. President Donald Trump in early May controversially pulled the United States out of the 2015 landmark pact with Iran that placed limits on its nuclear program in return for easing economic sanctions. He said the West has realized that a dialogue with Putin is inevitable in order to preserve the accord. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will also visit Russia at the end of the week. International investigators said a missile that downed a Malaysian Airlines flight over eastern Ukraine in 2014 belonged to a Russian brigade. Moscow rejected the accusation. Before Macron's trip, Human Rights Watch also implored him to raise the issue of rights abuses with his Russian counterpart, following a crackdown on dissent and pressure on minority groups in the country. Thomas I. Likeness, Eagle News, I'm one with 25.
Thank you, Thomas. Dozens of people are feared to have died in a heat wave gripping Pakistan's largest city, Karachi, this week, a charity in the sprawling metropolis said Tuesday, as temperatures hit 42 degrees Celsius or 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Casey Javier with the details.
Dozens of people are feared to have died in a heat wave gripping Pakistan's largest city, Karachi, this week, a charity in the sprawling metropolis said Tuesday, as temperatures hit 42 degrees Celsius, 108 degrees Fahrenheit. The non-profit Ethi Foundation said scores may have been killed by the sweltering weather, with double the usual number of bodies sent to the city's morgues in recent days. Faisal Ethi, head of the welfare organization, which oversees a variety of public health projects, including morgues and ambulance services, said, "We have received 180 dead bodies in the last 4 days, which is more than double of what we receive normally." The provincial government in Sindh province disputed the estimate. Muhammad Ali Shaikh, director of the Provincial Disaster Management Authority in Sindh, said only one casualty has been reported due to heat stroke so far. The heat wave coincides with the beginning of Ramadan, when millions of devout Pakistanis abstain from food and drink from sunrise to sunset. The Pakistan Meteorological Department warned hot to very hot weather is likely to prevail in Karachi during next 2 to 3 days, forecasting highs of 44 degrees Celsius during the period. Amir Habib from Karachi's Karangi said his brother was among the dead and had been rushed to the hospital after collapsing at work on Monday. The megaport city, capital of southern Sindh province, is hit by frequent power cuts and has few green spaces. People living on its crowded streets have little access to shelter or safe drinking water, making them acutely at risk in blistering temperatures. In June 2015, about 1,200 people died in southern Pakistan during a heat wave, with nearly two-thirds of the victims homeless people. For Eagle News, I'm Casey Javier, 1 with 25.
Thanks, Casey. Iran's first female manufacturer, a victim of Trump. Raisa Mingilit with more.
She fought through a male-dominated world to become perhaps Iran's first female manufacturing boss and was on the cusp of major success with the help of a European investor, until Donald Trump brought her crashing back to earth. When Leila Dineshvar was a little girl, she used to sit on the floor of her father's workshop asking for small jobs. But she persevered. Now 37, she runs her own company in Iran, making mobility equipment for hospitals and the elderly.
I wish I could say that this sanction is not on the government, it's on the people. Now I can give less to disabled people. I can give less to to elderly section, and the price I could offer now I cannot any longer offer. Either I have to close the factory, the company, or I have to continue with much higher price.
The breakthrough for the company called KTMA and selling under the brand Lord came in early 2016, just after Iran's nuclear deal with world powers came into force, lifting international sanctions. Within a couple of months, a Swedish investor, Anna Rosberg, had agreed to buy 25% of the company, bringing much-needed business acumen and capital.
But the problem is how fair we can be to our people. Our saying was we are providing European quality with very affordable price. Can I do that anymore? Can my customer, can my buyers do that? I don't know.
Being women in Iran's patriarchal business world could be tricky, but also an advantage.
We already had problems in getting the raw materials, stainless steel, because stainless steel mainly is supplied by foreign countries. It's imported. So already we had problems, and now I can say it's impossible.
Things were looking up. Low production costs meant that they could charge 5 times less than foreign firms, and they were doubling sales each year, finally landing a major contract with Qatari hospitals. But then Trump happened. Even before he pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal, the American president's constant threats to reimpose sanctions had a chilling effect on trade. It soon became hard to import crucial raw materials, particularly stainless steel. She watched Trump deliver his speech on May 8th, reimposing sanctions on Iran, with a mix of horror and fury, particularly when he claimed to be on the side of the Iranian people against their government. Anna remains defiantly positive.
Being an investor in generally and doing business in Iran is like a roller coaster. You take 1 step forward, you take 3 steps back. It is an amazing country. It has great opportunities, and I also feel that the people in Iran are very grateful when an investor comes there.
But whether or not the business can survive the Trump administration's vow to crush the Iranian economy with sanctions, it is already clear that investors like Anna are no longer coming to Iran. The dream of the nuclear deal, that hundreds of small businesses will blossom with European support, creating an important constituency supporting good relations with the West, was dead long before Trump finally yanked the U.S. out of the agreement.
My view is that Trump will have a very little impact. Iranians are a very resilient people. They have lived under great hardship in the past, which has resulted in they have their own ecosystem today. They're basically producing everything they need. You can question the quality, but it's still there.
For Eagle News, I am Raisa Mangilit, 1 with 25.
Up next, EBC's Kat Joy brings us to the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. Eagle News Canada will return shortly. This is Eagle News Canada. I am Lou Aquino. Calgary hosts Comic and Entertainment Expo. Kat Joy with the story.
Do you like comics, science fiction, anime, gaming, or even cosplay? Let's find out if the Calgary Expo has all those for you.
The Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo, aka Calgary Expo, is a 4-day event that happens annually during spring here at Stampede Park in downtown Calgary. What started with a small group of people about a decade ago, it has now grown, making Calgary Expo the largest pop culture convention in Western Canada. With a spokesperson, Lindsay Thomas, aka Emily Expo, she tells us about the Calgary Expo over the years and what to expect.
The Calgary Expo started when the founder, Kendrick Fong, he decided that there needed to be a convention such as this, and he pretty much ran everything himself with a tiny group of volunteers, and we had about 3,000 people attend, and now here we are taking over the Stampede grounds 100,000 people later. We are constantly looking for ways to make the show better and tighten things up, so that is certainly going to be apparent in the future as things move forward, and we're excited to see what's going to happen.
One may attend workshops and panel discussions with comic artists, celebrity guests, and even popular cosplayers, or join an autograph session with Calgary Expo guests. Gamers, of course, have something to look forward to. Others may even join active events available indoors and outdoors. The Artist Alley, where local talents display and sells artworks, is a hit. Like it's Birdie, a popular artist on social media who's been working in the Calgary Expo for the past few years. He shares us his experience and tells us why the Fan Expo is special.
This is something I do passionately and something that I've tried to pursue, and ever since getting into the con business and trying out for my own booths for myself, it's kind of opened my eyes to a whole new community. I've been doing cons for 3-4 years now, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. It seems like every year that passes by, the community just gets larger and larger, and I think this year Fan Expo is set to draw in the largest crowd it has in the previous years, so just a growing business, I feel.
But the one thing that you can't help but notice are the cosplayers walking around the convention. We got a chance to meet some of the cosplayers, and they tell us what makes the Calgary Expo fun.
It's my first time here, and I was just really interested with all the other cosplayers and all the booths and the things that are going on here.
I thought I'd come down, check it out, see the booths, see the celebrities, see some of the major names.
I love being around like-minded people. It's just a lot of fun, and it's a place you can just get out, be somebody else, and have a good time.
Reporting from the Calgary Expo, for Eagle News, I am Kat Joy, 1 with 25.
That is this week's Eagle News Canada. Join us next week for stories that matter to you. Visit our website at Eaglenews.PH. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/Eaglenews.PH. Thank you for watching. I am Lou Aquino. I'm 1 with 25.